last time.
Just let me know when you want me to start, just
We've still got folks rolling in, Dan, but
okay.
if you want to go ahead and get started, um, you know, welcome, folks.
Wait 1 minute. Uh, well, we'll start. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the June CTIPP CAN call, CTIPP Community Advocacy Network call. We appreciate all of you joining us today. I'm Dan Press. I'm the General Counsel for CTIPP, and my co-host is Jesse Kohler, the Executive Director. And we're joined by our Director of Government Affairs, Jed Kurt. Over the first 4 months of this year, CTIPP, along with two of our partners, Paces Connection and the National Prevention Science Coalition, put on a series of workshops at introducing innovative trauma-informed programs being implemented around the country. And while we were providing information out, we also got a tremendous amount of feedback. And the feedback we got, the overriding message was that people are really eager to be part of a national trauma-informed community. So over the last couple of weeks, CTIPP has sat down and put together an agenda of ways that we could help contribute to the creation of a national trauma-informed community. And I want to just quickly run through those. We'll be talking about them in future CTIPP CAN calls and in emails you'll be getting from Jesse. But just give you a broad outline of where CTIPP is heading. First, we're working to create an association of statewide trauma-informed coordinators. Something like 30 some odd states now have statewide coordinators. They're either working for the state government or they're working for nonprofits. And we want to bring them together so they can share their activities, their experiences, and also to become an advocacy force. Secondly, we're creating something called Press On, which is a national coalition of local trauma-informed cross-sector coalitions. Again, purpose is to give the local coalitions an opportunity to share their experiences, but also to become a powerful voice in Washington, to let our elected officials know that there is a tremendous wave of trauma-informed activity going on at the local level. Third is we're helping to promote communities of practice, opportunities for people who are implementing trauma-informed programs in different sectors to come together, again, to share their experiences. So far, we have communities of practice created in the sectors of higher education, law enforcement, faith-based activity, corrections, and did I miss one? Health. If you're interested, if you're implementing trauma-informed programs in a particular sector and you want to come together with people who are doing the same thing from around the country, for example, those of you involved in child welfare programs or early childhood programs and want to create a community of practice, get hold of us and we'll help you set it up. They're basically operations that you yourself would administer with a little bit of support from us, but it's an opportunity to come together by sector. The fourth way we're promoting community is through the National Trauma Campaign, which gives each of you as an individual to come together with members of your congressional district, people in your congressional district, and educate your congresspeople, your senators about the trauma-informed work going on in your communities and advocate when legislation is coming up in Congress. It's an opportunity anybody could do just signing up on the National Trauma Campaign website. And finally, CTIPP CAN. We're now in our fourth year, and based on the feedback we got, we're going to make some changes. In particular, we want to make CTIPP CAN more interactive, more opportunities for all of you to participate, to have a real dialogue going, and we're getting the technology that will allow that. So over the coming months, you're going to be hearing about these different efforts to create a national trauma-informed community. We hope you will join some or all of them. And we look forward to having you as part of our community. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Jesse to introduce our next presenters.
Thanks, Dan. Like Dan said, we absolutely love having all of you in our community. We learn so much and want to continue to cultivate opportunities to learn from your expertise and everything that you're seeing in the parts of the country that you are in, as we see in the chat box. We have a geographically and otherwise very diverse audience here with us. And so leveraging your expertise as we continue to build and cultivate and advance the trauma-informed, prevention-focused, healing-centered movements broadly, we really rely on your expertise and look forward to new opportunities to do so. One quick thing before I turn it over to Laura for a very exciting quick presentation about some advancements within CTIP. One thing is that as CTIP grows, we are currently operating predominantly off of a one-time gift. And I have spoken in the past about the need for donations. There's a donation link on our website. The other thing that I wanted to ask very quickly, which some funders that we've reached out to and are engaged with have asked for as well, is if CTIP, I'll just ask the broad question of how does CTIP help and support you? What does CTIP mean to you? And if you have the ability and opportunity to send a quick email, it can be a quick blurb, it can be much longer about what CTIP means, how the trauma-informed movement supports you, how either the campaign or the workshop series that we've done have been helpful. If you are able to provide some of that feedback, so that way we can show the funders that it's not just us saying great things about the organization, but we have folks all around the country who are engaged with CTIP and who benefit from the work that we do, that would be greatly appreciated. So I will put my email in the chat. Don't feel pressured to do that, but if you would feel willing and able to put some words down about what the organization and what our work means to you and how we support the movement, that would be greatly appreciated. And with that, we have very exciting updates within CTIP. It's been a long time coming. Laura has been leading for a long time in the development of a new website. And so I will turn it over to Laura quickly to go over the new website for CTIP that's going to launch very, very soon.
That's right. Thank you, Jesse. Yeah, I'll keep it brief. So yes, very, very exciting news. We have a brand new shiny website that's launching. We're going to be switching everything over later this week. So Monday will be the formal announcement. But if you want to take a peek over the weekend, you'll see lots of really exciting updates. The whole idea with modernizing this website was to make the information easier to find, make it easier for the network and the community to engage with each other, and also share ideas and resources. So a couple of areas I just want to point out that you'll see that are new, that are currently not on our website. So we've added a whole policy priorities section that has all sorts of ideas across all the sectors and lifespan for policies in your community and in your populations. We've also added the 14 dimensions of our overall vision of what we think a society, a trauma-informed society would look like. And so that's got some really great information, as well as links to resources for more information and for more ideas. We also have a new series. It's an advocacy workshop. So it's 9 parts that Whitney Maris has put together, and it's incredible. It's got videos and reflection questions and PowerPoints and all sorts of really great things. So it's sort of meant to be a journey through all 9 parts where you'll be able to reflect and share feedback on each one as you learn various components of the series. And then we've also created a whole new resource center that's got everything you could ever need or want. And we're always open to more resources to add to it. So it'll be easy to search, categorize, tagged, so you can find what you're looking for faster. And also a great way to sort of share and uplift the really great work that all of our partners are doing across the country. So definitely opportunities there to submit blogs, commentary, resources, et cetera, to that. One thing that's throughout is we really want your feedback. You know, we see this website as sort of a living, evolving entity. And as the movement evolves, the website will evolve with it. And so you'll notice throughout the website, there are opportunities for you to share feedback, whether that's on policy priorities or on that vision dimension section that I mentioned, or, you know, whether it's you want to share your story or share some really good things that are happening in your community. Also, we have sign up forms throughout for all the different things, whether it's subscribing to the newsletter or signing up for the National Trauma Campaign. And then we also have a Chat and Chew, which is where you'll be able to sign up for weekly sessions with CTIP staff. So Jesse, myself, Jen, will be making ourselves available just about every week, but the most updated schedule will be on the website. So you'll be able to quickly sign up, add it to your calendar, and do it again in just a very quick and seamless way. So that's really it. I think, yeah, the big thing, just to reiterate, is like we would love feedback and we would love input and ideas. We want this to be a resource and a value add to all of you and all of your efforts. And so the more improvements we can make to the website, all the better.
Thanks, Laura. It's going to be really beautiful and engaging and easy to navigate. But again, there are different opportunities for feedback and input as we continue to grow. And so, like I said earlier, we rely and look forward to your feedback and thoughts and your expertise in the field as we develop a coalition and an infrastructure of support ranging from the national level all the way to the local grassroots, which is where relationships are built. And we know that healing takes place in the context of healthy relationships over time. And so as much as we can organize ourselves to support what is going on at the state and local levels is only going to strengthen the full movement. And so really appreciate that, excited for that to launch, and we'll do some more walkthroughs, but please engage, look through, let us know your thoughts. And with that, I will turn it over to Jen Kurt, our Director of Government Affairs, for some very exciting policy updates.
Thanks so much, Jesse. It's good to be with you all again. We're going to spend until about 2:40 today talking about policy and what's happening in DC. I'll provide some updates on an initiative we're working on to get funding for cross-sector community coalitions that are addressing trauma. I'll also provide some updates on appropriations, which are the annual federal funding bills, and some news about what the president is doing on the topic of mental health and prevention. And then we have two guest speakers from Capitol Hill staff who will come to talk about legislation for a new ACEs study, and then another staff member who will talk about what the House and Senate are doing on gun violence legislation. So before I invite any of our speakers, I want to talk a little bit about Section 101 from the Rise from Trauma Act. And I am putting in the chat a blog post that CTIP recently put up for your reading at another time. But essentially, there's this provision that provides long-term funding for cross-sector community coalitions that are doing the work to bring together law enforcement, schools, parents, housing advocates to join together and address the issue of trauma. And we really fleshed out what that strategy looks like and all of the benefits that we're seeing from that in communities. So we give specific examples like in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Washington, Rhode Island, North Carolina, Virginia, and Texas, just for a few of them, and really flesh out why this is such an important thing that Congress needs to be aware of and put some funding behind. And so we've been working to advance this specific new grant program in a number of different ways. So there's the standalone bill, which we'd love to pass as a standalone bill. We tried to get it in the Build Back Better Act, which many of you know is stalled and did not end up getting passed in the Senate. And now we're trying to get it into the Senate mental health package. So the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, or the Senate Health Committee, they're currently working on a package to address the mental health crisis and the opioid overdose crises. And so we have CTIP led a letter that we sent last week, and many of you may have signed on to that and seen that letter. We had to send it pretty quickly because they're moving quite fast on this one, but we did get 42 organizations on board advocating for the inclusion of that specific funding in that package. And so we expect to see draft legislation on that in this summer. And we will definitely keep everyone posted on how we fare with that, if there are other opportunities to weigh in. And if you're interested, you should, have plenty of additional opportunities to let your voices be heard, so we can try and get this across the finish line as soon as possible, because we know how much these coalitions work in providing results, but funding can be so difficult because of the cross-sector nature, and just because funding can be tough to secure. And then on the appropriations front, so for those of you who don't know, every fiscal year, Congress has to pass a federal budget to fund all the federal programs that trickle down into states and other programs and the agencies. CTIP has made several requests of the appropriations committees asking for higher funding levels for programs that support trauma-informed care and trauma responsive systems and trauma transformation. Next week, the House Appropriations Committee will be marking up their version of these bills. So we'll get a chance to see from that text if our asks made it into this initial draft. If they did make it in, we will be advocating for its continued inclusion all the way across the finish line. And if it didn't, we'll be pushing for a strategy to get it included as an amendment or things like this. And so one of the asks you may recall that CTIP led was to have $1 billion to increase the number of school-based mental health professionals, and then use that grant funding to build trauma-informed schools school-wide. We held some time a couple months ago where everyone stopped in the call and called their member of Congress. And I wanted to share that we had 86 members of Congress champion this request to the Appropriations Committee. And that's up from 70 in the last Congress with a similar sort of request. So really excited about that. This is such an important ask, of course, as children are returning to school with experiencing so much trauma during the pandemic and bringing that with them to school in their emotional backpacks. So we'll definitely be keeping an eye out for that, and we'll keep you updated on other opportunities to move that across the finish line. And then the last thing that I wanted to just touch on is that during his March State of the Union address, President Biden laid out his national strategy to address mental health, where he's engaging all the different agencies to mobilize around supporting mental health, especially for youth. And it's fantastic to have on that level such a commitment to addressing mental health. But we did notice that there was a lack of focus on prevention. It was very focused on intervention and treatment, which is fantastic. And some language in there about trauma-informed care, but we want to make sure that they're also focusing on preventing mental health through addressing trauma. And so CTIP wrote a letter to the administration encouraging them to just embed in there some focus on prevention as a key component of this strategy. And at the end of May, which was Mental Health Month, the administration announced additional steps that it took to start to enact that strategy. And they did include an emphasis on preventing mental health challenges by creating healthy environments. And specifically, their statement, I think, is really powerful and important in this shift towards also incorporating prevention. They said, no health problem can be addressed solely through the healthcare system. We must also invest in programs that can prevent mental health challenges and build environments that promote wellness and recovery. Decades of research show that coordinated prevention across settings can pay long-term dividends, including reductions in community violence. Similarly, when settings provide services and restorative programs that support individuals with mental health problems or other at-risk behaviors, they can promote broader social and economic gains. So we're really excited to see this prevention and the holistic approach, and ready to support the administration in any way that we can on that. So I did want to share that update as we continue to follow through on that. And now I know our first speaker has joined. And so in just a minute, I'm going to hand it over to Megan. Megan is a senior policy advisor for Senator Angus King. He is an independent representing Maine. Megan covers the senator's health policy, and she is the lead on the development and introduction of the senator's Improving Data Collection for Adverse Childhood Experiences Act. So Megan is here to tell us a bit more about this legislation and how folks on this call can be supportive.
Great, thanks, Jen. As Jen mentioned, I work now with Senator King, but I recognize a lot of names and faces from my work with Senator Heidi Heitkamp on trauma. So it's good to see you guys again. And I'm excited to be working in this space. I thought it might be good for me to just kind of go through kind of top level summary. It's not a really long bill, but go through a summary, talk through the process of how we identified this bill and introduction, and then working with a Republican to find a way forward and reintroduce it as a bipartisan bill with some changes, and then sort of what we're working on for next steps. So last month, we reintroduced the Improving Data Collection for ACEs Act with Senator Murkowski and Representative McBath had initially introduced this last Congress, and some of Senator King's key priorities are mental and behavioral health and addressing that and recognizing the importance of trauma in that space, prevention, and improving public health data collection. So this was kind of like all things in one, and so we identified that as a bill we wanted to pick up and bring to the Senate. So we had a lot of conversations, good conversations with Republican colleagues trying to find someone to partner with us, because we know that legislation, when it's bipartisan, has a lot better chance advancing. And Senator Murkowski was very interested, but really wanted to be sure that we were incorporating historical trauma, just recognizing not only the importance of that issue for populations impacted with high ACE scores, but also specifically her constituency of Native Americans, Alaska Natives, and American Indians. So we weren't able to get to language specifically changing Representative McBath's language. So we just introduced the bill on our own last Congress, just to put a marker down and have something to point to show that there is support for this concept, and also knowing that both the Health Committee and the Finance Committee would be interested in picking up mental health in this Congress. So continued those conversations, and again with that understanding that we would keep talking with Murkowski's staff, and we worked a lot to come to the language that we've now reintroduced last month with just small changes, but acknowledging that generational trauma and historical trauma play a major role, and we want to make sure that the CDC is looking through that. So the legislation itself is looking to fill the research gaps at CDC. There hasn't been a lot of attention paid since the initial ACEs study. And so wanting to build on what is already in place there, but then build that out and support the research and some programmatic efforts there. So we authorized $7 million annually over 5 years, and also tasked the secretary with looking at some specific research topics that haven't been addressed, including making sure that the sample of participants and sample we're getting is diverse and nationally representative populations, showing the relationship between ACEs and negative health outcomes, and the intensity and frequency of ACEs in certain populations, and then adding in the impact of historical trauma in communities as determined by the secretary. We really didn't want to just name American Indians and Alaska Natives, because that leaves out a lot of other populations who have experienced generational and historical trauma. So wanted to be as holistic in that definition as possible. And then wanting to look at the particular risk and protective factors when looking at the impact of ACE scores, and finally the effect of social, economic, and community conditions on health and well-being. So we give the secretary a lot to work with, but it's still under the secretary's discretion and how they want to implement that at CDC, but really trying to build on the good work that's already being done there. So I'll just walk through a couple of the changes in the bill. It's S4332, and Representative McBath reintroduced their version a couple days before we did, and theirs is just the same, essentially the same version from last year. Our version adds in the findings section just the word historical trauma, and adds to evidence-based prevention and mitigation strategies by adding in culturally informed, just to address that sometimes evidence-based isn't always achievable in smaller populations, small tribal populations specifically from Senator Murkowski's priority perspective. And then we also added in a finding just acknowledging that American Indian, Alaska Native communities have a higher prevalence and longer lasting effects, and often with historically traumatic events. And then in the specific terminology, this was kind of what it took us a while to be sensitive about, because we really couldn't find a common definition of historical trauma in statute for programs under the Public Health Service Act. So we try to keep it pretty general, but what we settled on was the term historical trauma means the cumulative, transgenerational, collective experience of emotional and psychological injury in communities. And then we also identify Indian tribe and tribal organization just to ensure that they're also eligible to partner with CDC in some of the programmatic pieces. Our initial bill last Congress had $10 million for over 5 years annually. And Senator Murkowski had kind of said, maybe we could just say at such sums, which never works for me. So we got to 7, which I felt like that was somewhat of a win. Even we could make some concessions. So really, really happy that she's our partner in this, and excited about potential next steps. Feels like really low hanging fruit that we could have included. So I've had a lot of conversations with Health Committee staff about this bill. They're really more optimistic now that we have a Republican and it's bipartisan than they had been before. So hopefully that can continue to be part of the conversations as they develop their package to address mental and behavioral health in conjunction with the Senate Finance Committee working on their own package. And then had recent conversations with the negotiators of the gun package, recognizing that Senator Murphy is really pushing to make sure that there is a mental health component. And Senator King is part of the group that has supported the framework and the negotiated piece of our package, but it's now pen to paper and it's now putting the text there. And so I've shared with them that we really think this, it's baked, it's bipartisan, and it could really, for a very small amount of money, really advance what we don't know what the problem is if we don't know what the problem is and we don't have good data. So that's been sort of my pitch with them. And I do want to make sure I give time for questions. So that's my spiel.
Thanks so much, Megan. And I'm just going to put in the chat the summary for folks who are more visual than auditory learners, but just to revisit that bill. I mean, I think the original ACEs study in the 90s inspired a lot of the work that, we do, and got a lot of people involved. And so it would be just fantastic to see a follow-up study that includes, a diverse national representative sample, and includes, just robust information about the causality, the intensity and frequency of ACEs and that relationship. And so, as you mentioned, bipartisan bill, I can't imagine opposition, what opposition could be for this one. So I know that, CTIPP has endorsed this bill. We would, happy to help get this done in whatever way possible. If there are folks on this call who are interested in supporting the bill, whether it's an endorsement or otherwise, do you have any advice for how they can be supportive? Or, are you open to endorsements from organizations?
Absolutely, and really appreciate CTIPP's support as well. It means a lot being able to in these conversations with the people writing packages that they know that they'll have some backup. They're including that, and they have very strong advocates.
Great, awesome. So if anyone wants to endorse, wants for their organization to endorse this legislation, Megan put her her email in the chat, and you can email her directly. And I think as we're waiting for our next speaker, it looks like Katie Rose maybe has a question. Katie Rose, did you want to unmute yourself since Megan's graciously offered to answer a question?
Hi, no, I'm so sorry. I wasn't asking a question. I was trying to like raise my hand and say, Attached Families Organization is definitely willing to endorse. So I'll email her immediately so that she has all of my contact information.
Great. Thank you, Katie.
Fantastic.
My honor. Thank you. And thank you for all that you do.
Perfect. All right, Katie Rose. Yeah, thank you so much, Megan. Really appreciate it. If I get any follow-up questions, I will definitely send them your way, but just so appreciate the work that the senator is doing on this, really doing his due diligence to get this bill well situated to pass. So we are just ready to help you and appreciate your time today.
Jen,
you.
let me just jump in a second and just recognize what Megan has
Hey,
done.
Dan.
Hi, Megan. She was the very first staff person I ever talked to about trauma. It must have been 6-7 years ago. She, along with Max, are responsible for the trauma-informed provisions in the Support Act. And she's just been one of our great friends and advocates on the Hill. I just wanted to say thank you and recognize you for what you've done, Megan.
Thank you, Dan. It's always good to see your face. I don't get to see it as often as I used to, but appreciate that.
Right. We've got young blood like Jen now to take over.
Awesome.
Great. Well, thanks. And follow up with any questions and email as well.
Great. Perfect. Thanks so much.
Yep.
All right, everyone. We're going to move on to our next speaker, who I'm told just joined. So I know that gun violence legislation is really on everyone's minds. It's certainly in the news. We have a friend of mine from Capitol Hill here to discuss details of the legislation. Some of you may have followed the U.S. House of Representatives passed a bill very recently to address gun violence, and then the Senate is working on a different bill at this point. So DeMarquin is going to share some updates on that and the path forward. But I just want to mention that I recognize it's a heavy topic. So I'm also going to write in the chat when we are done with this portion of the conversation. So if you need to step away for this topic, that you know when to join us back again for the next portion. So with that, I can't find DeMarquin, but I will hand it over to you, my friend, if you want to unmute.
Hi there. Can folks see and hear me fine? I see nods. Great. Hello, everyone. My name is DeMarquin Johnson, and I serve as policy counsel for Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, who represents the Massachusetts 7th Congressional District. I am really happy to be able to join you all. I wasn't expecting such a huge crowd, but glad to know folks are tuned into this work. Always happy to be at the table with Jen and the good folks here. So I'm going to just give an update around what we've been seeing in the House and the Senate congressionally on action related to guns. And I'll start by talking about the most recent news, which is the Senate. In the Senate, folks may be aware that there was a bipartisan framework that was developed. It was led by 4 senators, but it does have the support currently of 10 Republicans that would overcome the filibuster. And the 4 main senators who worked on it, 2 Democrats, including Senator Chris Murphy and Senator Sinema, and 2 Republicans, Senators Cornyn and Senator Tillis. And these folks came up with this framework. And I keep using that word because I want to make sure folks know it is not a bill. It is not legislation. We don't have the exact details yet on what everything will be specifically, but we have a general idea. We have an outline that folks say that they are committed to working to become legislation. And this is historic. This moment of being able to get some type of agreement on gun violence prevention is historic. And I don't want to undercut that when I talk about what's happening in the House, but to get to the details of what's in the framework, there are a couple different elements. First starts with the red flag laws. You all may be familiar with that term. It's been in the news more recently, and they're referred to as crisis intervention orders. That is going to be an element that is included to allow for states to implement these red flag laws where someone can say, hey, I live with someone, or law enforcement can point to the fact that there is immediate danger if this person stays in possession of firearms. And that is an element that will be included. We're still waiting on details, as mentioned. Another element that is related is closing of the boyfriend loophole. Folks who may be aware of this know that within our statutes and current law around domestic violence and people who are accused and convicted or guilty of domestic violence, access to firearms is different whether or not you are the married husband or wife or partner and spouse, or if you're a quote unquote boyfriend or girlfriend and dating. And that differentiation has obviously endangered folks. So it is considered the boyfriend loophole, and that will be closed in this, it's supposed to be closed in this legislation. So that's an issue that folks have really organized around. Other areas in this regard is specific to mental health services. There's two really big things happening. One is funding for school-based mental health services. This is something that we know is unfortunate, the number of school-aged children that don't have access to a counselor or a mental health clinician or someone that can help support them and their mental health. So there's efforts to invest more resources to school-based mental health, in addition to looking at family mental health largely. And there's a model that has worked well in a lot of different areas of behavior health centers and integrating those with schools. So the agreement in the Senate does include investing in the family mental health services by expanding community behavior health centers. So that's something that we're excited for, something that I know my boss, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, has encouraged, has worked on expanding in her own district. So seeing this robust national, federal legislation that will be invested in this same resources would definitely be a welcome step. And then finally, I'll just touch on some of the more technical things that are also mentioned in this Senate framework. That means, clarifying who exactly is considered a licensed firearm dealer to ensure that we are requiring one, proper oversight of firearm licensees, but in addition, making sure that they are doing what they need to do as far as background checks when it comes to the selling of ammunition and firearms. There's also investments around telehealth with respect to mental and behavior health. And then there's a new process. Some folks may be aware that there was a huge push to raise the age to 21 to purchase firearms. Instead, the framework creates a extended process for people who are under the age of 21 that are trying to buy a firearm. This extended process would mean a look at some of their juvenile records. This was pretty well discussed in the aftermath of the Uvalde shooting, given the fact that the individual was able to buy guns on their 18th birthday despite having a juvenile record. And this framework would address that by expanding the background check to juvenile records. In addition, there's an added level of enforcement around straw purchasing. So folks may be aware that there are no background checks for the majority of straw purchasing, and that has allowed for people who typically would not pass a background check to have access to firearms. And this new provision that the Senate is hoping to include would allow for there to be enhanced penalties and greater enforcement. So there's a lot of different things in here. I will say the Senate framework seems to be in a politically viable position where there are multiple Republicans. I mentioned that there were 10 who were on the record committing to working with this framework, but since then we've even heard as from the Senate Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell, that he would support this framework if the legislation does accurately reflect it. So that has provided some optimism on exactly what can happen with this Senate legislation and movement on this. So that's something that there is no specific timeline on when the framework will become legislation and when legislation will become law, but there is a sense that folks want to do it before July 4th. There is a recess for the Senate at that time period, so they want to work and pass it before that recess. And, you know, we support all action that will save lives. We support this action, and we are excited to see what actually comes out, because there will be important details that have not been detailed, important details that have not been spelled out, and we're going to want to see exactly what they come to be as this framework becomes legislation. That's what's happening on the Senate side.
Sorry to interrupt you. So we're actually at time because I was not able to steal enough time to cover all of the in-depth wonky policy details, but that's great. So, you know, when you say it's historic, I mean, we've had a lot of these mass shooting events happen. Afterwards, there's a call for, you know, Congress to do something, but there wasn't able to meet a deal necessary to overpass that threshold. So historic because there is a deal, but would you say that this is a done deal, or would you say that this has potential to fall apart? Just to, you know, be realistic with expectations on, you know, what the path forward is on this.
It can definitely fall apart. It can fall apart, you know, in the next 5 minutes, given one, the fact that we know there will be the gun lobby who is going to firmly oppose this, and they will be advocating against this. Additionally, when it comes to putting a framework to text, we've seen previous examples of this falling apart. So it definitely can fall apart. It is not a done deal. There is, like I mentioned, optimism, given that they've even gotten to this point, and that's not something that happens regularly, but it is going to be something that requires, you know, steady pushing, steady advocacy, not only from members of Congress, but also from everyone writ large talking to their member of Congress.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much, Mark, and really appreciate you coming out and sharing that. Thanks for everything that your boss is doing to be a strong voice on issues of mental health and taking care of our kids. That sort of concludes the policy content. I'll stick around for the Q&A portion if anyone has any follow-up questions related to policy. And I will now turn it over to Jesse.
Thanks, Jen, and thank you, DeMarquine and Megan, for the wonderful updates. We're about halfway through. Obviously, there's a lot that's heavy stuff, and so, like I did a lot during the workshop series, just want to invite a quick brain break before we get into the wonderful presentation on integrated PACES science by Craig and Dennis, who I will introduce momentarily. But my personal favorite is the scissor winks, and so to do so, for those who want to participate, we'll put 2 fingers next to our eyes, and what we're going to do is close. If you're driving, please be safe. But if so, when we close our right fingers, we're going to wink our left eye, and then we're going to close our left fingers and wink our right eye, if that makes sense, right? And you'll see, oh, I'm already messing it up. And so go at your own pace. And if your mouth goes along with it, as far as I know, that is natural. And that is just a good example of a brain break. So we invite you to do whatever you need to do to help regulate yourself. Breathing exercises are also good. We know that a lot of these topics that we cover are very healthy, or heavy rather, and we want for you all to be healthy and take care of yourselves. And so please feel free to do so in whatever ways you need as these calls continue. We appreciate you all being on, and we are so excited now to introduce Craig McEwen and Dennis Haffron for their presentation, which is about an integrated PACES science, which includes much more than just the ACEs study, the neurobiology of toxic stress and its health effects, the epigenetics of stress, and the emerging understanding of resilience and healing. An integrated PACES science highlights as well the differential social distributions of both adverse and positive childhood experiences, and underlines the original focus of the ACE study on population health, not individual health. Craig McEwen is a professor of sociology emeritus at Bowdoin College. He collaborated with his neuroscientist brother Bruce, one of the world's leading experts on toxic stress, in writing about social structure, adversity, toxic stress, and intergenerational poverty. Craig and his brother, I believe, are both Oberlin alumni as well. So always good to have Oberlin alum alongside. And Dennis Haffron has worked as an agency director in delinquency prevention, labor community services, senior citizen services, community crisis centers, substance abuse prevention, and services for people with disabilities. So I know that that is not enough of an introduction, but Craig and Dennis, I want to turn it over to you. Thank you both so much for being here. One last thing that I will say is, as you listen to the presentations, please put questions in the chat as you have them. We will run through a queue. I will keep a queue going, and we will have a question and answer session at the end of the presentation and call. So please feel free to put Q&A in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on that. But Craig, I turn it over to you. And Craig, you are on mute.
There we go. Thanks, Jesse. Delighted to be here with support from colleague Dennis Haffron. As Jesse indicated, this idea of integrated science of PACES grew out of a collaboration with neuroscientist brother, who it turns out was a close colleague of Kim Noble, who was last month's presenter to the CTIPP CAN meeting in talking about poverty reduction and children's brain activity. There we go. Brief summary of what I'm going to talk about today. And I will read more here than I will from other slides. But the science of trauma and ACEs is incomplete without social science. Frameworks and words matter. The trauma frame is important but limited. ACEs and PACEs provide a complementary frame, but themselves are limited. The social determinants of health, social epidemiology, and population health provide frames that encompass ACEs and complement the trauma frame. At the center of all of this is the neurobiology of stress and toxic stress, which I won't talk much about. And a social science frame using social determinants turns attention to reducing trauma through public policies that prevent or reduce adversity and strengthen protections against toxic stress and trauma. So this relates very much to Jen's discussion of building community prevention. So words matter. They shape our understanding of problems and issues, and they point the way to actions to address those problems and issues. The word trauma tends to focus us on the health impact of external forces on individuals. So does the term toxic stress. These concepts tend to turn attention away from the sources or causes of trauma or toxic stress to their health and developmental effects. With that perspective, we naturally turn to efforts to provide healing and support and to prevent further harm through trauma-informed institutions and practices. All of that's good. But moving to an ACEs and PCE, Positive Childhood Experiences framework, can focus us on population, not individual health. And clearly it calls attention to the broad issues of childhood adversity. And the positive childhood experience focus enlarges the vision to focus on buffers against toxic stress and trauma. So let's deal with these big concepts. Social epidemiology is a social science concerned with the way social structures, institutions, and relationships influence health. The goal of social epidemiology is to inform public health and other policy that can improve population health. It calls attention, for example, to issues of health equity and inequity. Population health refers, as the slide says, to the health status and health outcomes within a group of people rather than considering the health of one person at a time. Unlike the trauma or toxic stress framework, attention to population health tends to lead to thinking about broad public health and policy strategies rather than health, medical, and care for individuals. It focuses on prevention at the population level. Social Determinants of Health. The same year that the original ACE study was published in 1998, Sir Michael Marmot and Richard Wilkinson published their first report on the social determinants of health for the World Health Organization. This perspective widens further our frameworks. The social determinants, as the Centers for Disease Control suggests, are conditions in the places where people live, learn, work, and play that affect a wide range of health and quality of life risks and outcomes. And you see the list: economic stability, social and community contexts, including workplace conditions, racism, neighborhood and built environment, including housing quality, pollution, levels of crime, violence, access to education, access to health care. And as indicated, the key mechanism, the biological mechanism, which my brother studied, is toxic stress. And we know that adversity can lead to toxic stress. In the absence of strong positive childhood experiences, and in the context of considerable genetic variability in sensitivity to one's environment. All of this should remind you of the wonderful graphic here, which includes adverse childhood experiences, adverse community conditions, climate and environment stressors. And my colleague Dennis Haffron has added in the bottom right to remind us of the societal, political, and institutional context for adverse household and community experiences, as well as for general well-being. ACEs are one part of the social determinants of health. It's a much bigger frame of reference. And ACEs are examples of those social determinants that are shaped by those social determinants themselves. For example, using data from 23 states, researchers found that average ACE scores were 55% higher for households with income less than $15,000 than for households with incomes of $50,000 or greater. Respondents who were unemployed had ACE scores 46% greater on average than those who were employed. Other measures of ACEs, such as the important but much neglected ones in the National Survey of Children's Health, which, footnote, are not retrospective with adults. They are contemporaneous measures of children's circumstances through responses by parents to surveys, and have good national samples. And they include economic difficulties of households, experience of racism and discrimination as adverse childhood experiences, unlike the original ACE study. And indeed, if we measured the broader range of social determinants, in addition to the household adversities in the ACEs study, these patterns of connection between race, place, class, location would be even more evident. And geographical location matters. National Survey of Children's Health found children with 2 or more adversities constituted 26% of the population in Alaska and Arkansas, 28% in Oklahoma, but 14% in California and 12% in New Jersey. Place matters along with race, class, and the many other aspects of the social determinants. But the social determinants aren't all about adversities. The children most exposed to adversity are also the least likely to have access to household and community supports, to PCEs. So, for example, research from the National Survey concluded that children of minority race or ethnicity were less likely to have a mentor for advice or guidance, live in a safe neighborhood, or live in a supportive neighborhood, and less likely to experience 3 or more positive childhood experiences. Similar pattern holds for kids from households with the lowest incomes compared to those with incomes at or above 200% of the federal poverty level. So once again, underline the children most exposed to adversity also have the least access to community and household supports. It's important to underline that much of this research, particularly the ACEs study, are about adult health. And certainly the National Survey of Children's Health is about children's health. But childhood adversity not only increases the likelihood of health problems, it also affects children's probabilities of high school achievement, school completion, occupational success, and much more. So when we talk about childhood adversity, we're talking about shaping life chances and life trajectories. It's a key contributor to ongoing inequities in our society. Now, Felitti and Anda and colleagues who did the original ACEs study were in fact acting as social epidemiologists concerned with population health. And they pointed to the importance of policy in their original report of ACE's research. In 1998, they wrote, as says here, primary prevention of adverse childhood experiences has proven difficult and will ultimately require societal changes that improve the quality of family and household environment during childhood. So what needs to change, and how might those changes be accomplished through policy and advocacy? Many different answers, obviously. But take, for example, the Building Community Resilience Collaborative at the Redstone Center at George Washington University, and its community resilience model, which supports community health by aligning policy programs to address adversity and adverse community environments. It also works to support communities in providing their support for positive childhood experiences. The Harvard Center on the Developing Child, whose website you should regularly visit if you haven't, provides considerable resources on the ways that scientific research on stress can be translated into policy and action. Their general framework focuses on policies that strengthen core life skills, support responsive relationships, and reduce sources of stress, such as deep poverty, systemic racism, intergenerational trauma, community violence. The Centers for Disease Control has a very important report called Preventing Adverse Childhood Experiences, Leveraging the Best Available Evidence. And they underline strengthening economic supports for families. For example, the child tax credit, child care subsidies, paid maternity leave, flexible and consistent work schedules for parents, promoting pro-social norms that protect against violence through public education campaigns, ensuring a strong start for children, including home visiting, high-quality daycare, preschool for all, teaching skills through parenting education and socio-emotional learning in schools, connecting youth to caring adults and activities, programs like Big Brothers, Big Sisters, mentoring, and intervening to lessen immediate and long-term harms, which comes back to trauma-informed care in part, family-centered treatment of substance use disorders, many of the mental health, substance use concerns, abuse concerns that were highlighted earlier in some of the discussions of policy. So this has been a quick run through, and here are the 4 takeaways I'm hoping for today. I hope that you will, if you haven't already, adopt a broad social determinants framework side by side with a trauma-informed framework. That you will recognize that although adversity and toxic stress may be found anywhere in the United States, they are unevenly distributed across race, place, class, and other variables. as are positive childhood experiences. And this, I hope, will lead you to identify and advocate for state and federal policies and community action that address those differentials in ways that reduce toxic stress and trauma and increase supports for families and children. So with that, thank you. I look forward to questions and a rich discussion.
Thank you so much, Craig. Getting some love in the chat. One quick,
Raise hand. How do I raise my hand?
Dennis, you are off mute, so if you just want to go ahead, you are certainly welcome to.
Okay, I just wanted to say, for my part, what you have just seen is what the takeaway of a social scientist on the issue of PACEs. And I, for my part, want to not just back up what Craig is saying, but was saying that we need to take a very broad view of PACEs as it exists in our society and our cultures. And I'm hoping that anthropologists, sociologists, historians, and economists will also tend to chime in and get their views about PACEs and our society. That's my second to what Craig was saying.
Thank you for that, Dennis. I also wanted to put in the chat for everyone the piece that, so that link in the chat is a paper that Craig and Dennis wrote together that sort of outlines a lot of what you heard there. So in the chat, if you're interested in reading further, and we will share that again in our follow-up email, I wanted to share that with folks. Katie Rose, I see your hand up if you have a question. If other folks have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, or you can raise your hand and we'll go in line and in order. And Katie, do so safely, but cool.
Thank you. I appreciate you letting me raise my hand. I obviously am driving, so I couldn't type in the chat. So thank you for acknowledging that.
Of course. Stay safe.
First of all, I want to say thank you very much. That presentation was fantastic, and as a person with lived experience and a certified parent support specialist who's dealing with 7,000 families raising children with high ACEs and complex trauma disorder, those are all wonderful goals and plans. I want to say that off the bat, but we really need to at some point bring into what are we going to do right now. Obviously, the children who are in foster care or adopted from foster care have their brains have not developed properly, a large majority. And so we have thousands of families that are dealing with behaviors that most of society doesn't even believe is possible to exist in children, but do exist in children. So we need to come up with a plan that supports the people who are fostering and adopting these children and who got them with the high ACEs, the complex trauma, the developed brain that didn't develop properly, versus and shaming those people, because that's what's happening. And I don't even know if this is appropriate for right now, and I apologize for that, but I feel like it just keeps getting missed. My families are being arrested for the behaviors of these children, and we need to see policy and changes that are supportive of adopted families, supportive of foster care families, acknowledging that these behaviors are real, and that these children need help right now, and they don't fit in the mental health checkboxes. You know, a reward chart isn't going to change that their brain didn't develop properly due to high ACEs. And I need someone to start talking about what we're going to do to help the families that are raising these children right now to help them heal. Because talk therapy isn't going to do it, and they don't fit into the check boxes of do this, do this, do this, and then, oh great, they're all better. So we have all these kids from obviously high ACEs backgrounds that were removed from their biological families, are now being raised by others, having these issues, and the ones that open their homes to them are the ones being blamed for the behavior. So when are we going to acknowledge that the mental health system does not have something yet in place for these children?
Katie Rose, crucially important points. One of the underlining findings of neuroscience is that the brain is plastic, and that later interventions, positive support, warm, loving families can help change. But the challenge that you're pointing to in part is that those families themselves need support and resources, and that may mean some social policies that provide general support to families, and these families in particular. Carrie has a hand up.
Before Carrie, quickly, I just want to also acknowledge Jennifer Lake put in the chat that trust-based relational intervention, TBRI, is an excellent resource for foster families to help kids
Great.
that come from hard places. And so just wanted to highlight that. But Carrie Sipp, I don't see you on my screen anymore. I hope that
I'm
you're
here.
there. Oh, hello. All right, go ahead.
I'm here. Hey,
Oh, there you are.
good,
Hey.
good to see you again. Gosh, Dr. McEwen and Hafron, Doctors McEwen and Hafron, thank you both so much for this. I just wonder if our current economic system is ever going to support the wonderful solutions that you have, some of what you've put forth. If a capitalistic society is counterintuitive or could in any way be altered, how could we alter it to help support what we're talking about here? Because it seems as though it's totally in diametric opposition to our being able to do what we need to do.
Well, political action is the way to do that. And that means people have to be attentive to important policies and become advocates. There's great advocacy for trauma-informed policies and practices. That's part of the picture, but clearly prevention involves a whole range of other policies, which may be politically divisive at times in today's context. But in a sense, we know what we need to do. The question is building the political will to do it.
Just adding on to that, what I'm interested in doing, Carrie, is you've just asked a question that we need to ask some economists to answer. And I would like to get people like that involved in understanding, building our understanding of the whole issue of ACEs.
Right. And it was so good that we had Tony Biglan, who wrote Rebooting Capitalism and Nurture Shoot, can't remember the name of the nurture book, but anyway, who was part of the building the movement. But I support that, Dennis, that we need to have a webinar soon, and maybe Jesse and I'll put that together on how the economic system could support the kind of reboot that we need, and get the economists in on this would be great.
Richard, thank you. Richard, I see your hand up, but before you go, there was an earlier comment or question in the chat from Jesse Graham on how is this information being integrated with the Center for Social Policy regarding early relational health? Are they using this SDOH framework? Craig, are you aware?
Am not aware.
That's okay. So just wanted to ask that. Dennis, do you know?
No, I don't, but you know, the whole issue of what we're doing and what Craig and I are doing with PACES and the social sciences, we need to build bridges. We need to involve different academic or different viewpoints, and we need to build bridges between these viewpoints. So I'm not aware, but we should be, and we should be creating mechanisms to be aware.
Thank you. Richard, go ahead.
Yes, I think that California is leading the nation in actually doing something, taking action to implement what Craig just presented to us today. And we've been involved with this California ACEs Aware initiative that was started by Nadine Burke-Harris as the Surgeon General, but now they're actually implementing this at the community level. And the University, UCLA and the University of California, San Francisco are now leading that effort. And that is and I put the two links in the chat box there, but if you want to see what one state is doing to actually take action to implement what Craig presented, California has really done a good job of moving forward with getting this to happen at the local community level. And so for other states, that would be an example to just observe as to how this is going to play out. But they are already moving forward on a lot of those things that Craig presented today. And so we're actually making a presentation to that UCLA University of San Francisco group tomorrow on how to use technology to support their efforts there in California. So just an example of somebody that's doing something to implement what Craig said.
Thank you. One point that's important to raise from Craig's presentation that we want to encourage people to continue to use, and including California and elsewhere, is that ACEs are not predictive at the individual level. It is truly a population-based measurement tool, and so to not misuse the ACE study is incredibly important. To use it for what it is strong in. It is the strongest predictor of population level health outcomes, behavioral outcomes, social outcomes. It is not predictive at the individual level, and it can become stigmatizing. So I just want to add that as well. But thank you, Richard, for that comment and for the work you're doing there. Joan, I see your hand up. Oh, Craig, go ahead if you have a...
If I could just reinforce that, I think I skipped over that in my presentation. In California, it turns out from the statewide ACEs study, the probability that an adult with 4 ACEs will have fair to poor health is 17.6 out of 100. The odds that someone with no ACEs will have fair to poor health is 9.5 out of 100. Now that means the odds are greater if you have more ACEs, but the prediction of individual ill health is not very good from an ACE score. But it's a great population health tool because though it's a weak predictor for individuals, if you can improve public health by reducing ACEs, you will have a marked impact on the population. So difference between individual health, population health, ACEs were designed to look at population health. And Joan?
Yes, I have a question that I'd like to put before the group because I worry about it all the time. we have used the public health model to handle any number of public health issues, cigarette smoking, opioid use, but it fails to be applied to gun violence. And I'm just curious as to your thoughts on how come, because this society does know how to handle a problem. You know, we have seat belts now. We didn't have those when I was a kid, but because of the promoting positive social norm that you spoke of, you know, now our children are children of bondage. But anyway, what are your thoughts on that? Why won't why won't we as a society apply the public health model to gun violence?
There have been efforts to do that. I think for almost 20 years, research about gun violence as a health issue was essentially prohibited by Congress. It's now possible, and there is an re-emerging a wide range of research about gun violence. So research is helpful to that public policy approach, but again, it's going to take the political will to understand it as a public health issue, and that's going to take a great deal of advocacy. I think folks at CDC would look at it that way, but others reject that view. So unfortunately, it's become politicized.
Okay. I know in Pennsylvania, the governor did sign that violence is a public health issue that should be worked with through a trauma lens. But I just don't see that being done, even though, you know, that is under Wolf, it exists.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess it's just, you have to keep pounding the pavement, visiting the offices of the elected officials and get groups like this to support that position, because the children stop their parents from smoking. My children stopped me from smoking because of what they were learning in school. And so we do know these things work.
And perhaps CTIP can include that in its agenda, because clearly trauma and gun violence are intimately connected, both as cause and consequence.
And my final thought, I'm hearing now that death by gun wound is the largest killer of children in this country, and that suicide in predominantly white males, that it's gun violence. So it's not a Black thing. I mean, you know, sometimes things don't get done because of racism, but this isn't because of racism. Or maybe it's because of lack of access to correct knowledge and research. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dennis, did you have a final comment there as well? I saw
Yeah.
your hand up.
4 letters, VOTE, vote.
Thank you. Craig, before we start to wrap up the call with a few final thoughts, I'm curious if you or Dennis have any final thoughts. I'm curious what you would encourage people, if there's like 1 minute sort of talking points, a quick elevator speech, or anything else that you're thinking when folks speak to their congressional representatives, how they can communicate all that you put into this presentation very succinctly, if you could, or if you'd rather close with something else, that's completely up to you.
Well, Dennis's 4 letters are good, but I am not good at that elevator speech. The power of the ACE study is that children's social environment affects their health as children and adults. That has huge costs for a society. And that's where the economists come in in documenting those costs. The costs are health costs, but they're problems of behavioral health, engagement with social service agencies, law enforcement, and that in the long run and even the shorter run, investing in supports for children and families and reducing adversity will pay huge dividends for the society and its economy. Period.
Thank you. For someone who's not good at elevator speeches, that was pretty good. Dennis?
Got a short one. Just remember that PACES is an psychophysiological phenomenon, and that we should look at it in a global way. And we should also look, we're talking about how PACES affect individual, looking at it at the individual, but it also comes back. How does this stuff function in our society and culture? These are unanswered questions, and maybe finding the answers to them will help us to find solutions.
Thank you. Dennis, Craig, thank you so much. If we can give a virtual
Thank
round of
you.
applause. This was a wonderful presentation. Really, really appreciate your time, the effort that went into the paper that's in the chat box, the presentation, and for being here with us today. Additionally, I want to thank all of you who were on the call. Taking 90 minutes out of your day is not ever easy, and really appreciate you taking the time and being here with us. To Laura's point earlier, I just want to quickly show you a few items on the website that came up today. So this is what the new website will look like. These are our advocacy modules to what Craig was talking about. This explores through 9 parts of asynchronous module learning what trauma-informed advocacy can look like, not just advocating for trauma-informed policy, which we do touch on, but how the practice of advocacy can actually be trauma-informed and how we can take care of ourselves as advocates, build relationships, the importance of relationships through advocacy with different elected officials, with staffers, with other key stakeholders. And so certainly when our website launches, encourage people to go through this, and within each of these, you'll find the video, but also some reflective activities that you can engage in as you go through, so that way it's interactive. You'll find other things, the policy work, the vision that we talked about as well. But I just wanted to let everybody know that would, hold on, my computer has gone crazy on me. If you all can see me, I can no longer see all of you. But wonderful. But I just wanted to share that as a way for people to engage and sort of build that advocacy muscle, that civic muscle. Additionally, like Laura said, myself, Jen, Laura are all going to hold chat and choose, and Jen is going to have theirs tomorrow. So Jen, I will turn it back over to you very quickly to do the commercial for that and invite folks to come join you.
Thanks so much, Jesse. Yeah, so tomorrow from 12 to 2 p.m. Eastern, I'll be holding Chat and Choose. This is every Thursday. If you're interested in coming out, asking questions, brainstorming, and anything policy, government affairs, what's going on at the White House, what are the chances that this gets passed, please come by. We'll have a place on our website when we launch to sign up for these. But for now, you can email me. And it's just a time for us to connect, and I can answer any questions you have.
Thanks, Jen. And the same will go for myself and Laura. We will also start to hold, to what Dan alluded to earlier, community conversations where there's more opportunity for engagement amongst and from all of you in our network to leverage your wisdom. We just went in and got a new software that's a little bit better than Zoom in terms of networking, breakout rooms that are targeted and specific. And so we'll start to launch those as well, and hopefully have some really engaging conversations, as well as develop relationships, because we know that, like I said earlier at the beginning of the call, relationships are the basis of this work. So with that, this has been a wonderful 90 minutes together. Really appreciate all of you. Hope you're doing well. Want to wish you all the best as we head into the summer. And we will have another wonderful call for CTIPP CAN call next month on the third Wednesday of the month from 2 to 3:30 Eastern time. That is consistent. And just to put it out there, the third Wednesday of next month is July 20th. So we look forward to seeing all of you then. Hope to see many of you before. Please reach out. And if you can, I'll just put it out again, write a letter of support if you're able to donate. Also love donations. We are a 501c3. Rely on those. But if you're able to write a letter of support for what CTIP means to you, why the work is so important, please feel free to send that over. It would be greatly appreciated. But more, we appreciate all of you so very much. So thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.